like I kind of with the thing about you said that the help both the book and the film is known almost worldwide now about technically if from a perspective somebody not educated but somebody who just probably just go to the movies would probably see this movie as black woman empowerment and now that you do say it and now that that we do now realize technically you look under it that there is this white that after all the whole the whole plot of women of this black women having their voices technically what they could say their freedom and actually it's the white woman delivering them if you think that in this cells I think because it's the white woman at the end of the bottom line is it's a white woman who delivered the black women if I see the whole thing you're saying what do you think if the movie was like you say in a black woman's perspective what if this was a black woman delivering this domestic help using their their
they probably never would have gotten to Hollywood. I mean, it could have. It could have. Like the color purple, but compare. I wouldn't even compare. Like you compare the color purple to the help in terms of the empowerment perspective. I disagree.
Okay.
Just for that main point.
That
main point that it was written by a black woman who had intricate knowledge of a black woman's standpoint, of history, of, her own family. And I think that's very different. So so you'll see that even though there was humor in The Color Purple, there was still humor. You show is ugly, Miss Celia and all of that. It was different because the undertone, it was clear patriarchy. There were scenes of rape, incest, things that went on that were exposed, and it was like shocking. And this was not the thing that these issues were not addressed. So I think that if it were by a black woman, that these issues would have been brought to the forefront. And I don't know how people in today's times would have responded, but it wouldn't, like, I looked at the reviews of The Help, and a lot of them were like, humorous, blah, 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 and I'm like, wow. A movie during that time,
right,
in Mississippi, those should not be the reviews. I mean, they should see the loophole here. Like, hello.
But then when you put in a love story, Skeeter gets a love story, then you've got, Chubby Checker playing in the background and the twist.
You get drawn in, but
Disneyfication of the
all about that.
The reason that I compared the story to Alice Walker's book was the creation of safe spaces for the women. You see between the two women, I'm sorry, I forget their name, Minnie and Aibileen, like that bond between black women because of struggle. And I know it's a different story because a white woman wrote it, but I'm talking about the creation of sisterhood and womanhood between the two women.
But it was a fake safe space.
Yeah, well, it's a fake safe space only because a white woman wrote it.
Right, she would not be let into the safe space.
Yeah, well, sometimes, we let white women in sometimes.
It's not with power and authority.
We only give you not with power and authority, but we'll let you in for a few tidbits.
Well, Lakeisha, you brought up something that I was struck by, and that was the friendship between Aibileen and Minnie. And I wanted you guys to comment on that and talk about, did you think that was a realistic portrayal? And then I also thought it was interesting that there was absolutely no sense of friendship among the white women. Because the white women were portrayed, they were portrayed as backbiting, shallow, among themselves. And I thought that was kind of an interesting contrast.
I was struck when Minnie said, "I'll take care of Aibileen," and I thought to myself, how? How are you going to
So what is what we do?
How is that going to happen? How you can't protect her? That's what I felt like. But I liked their relationship, but I didn't necessarily, think it was just a great element.
I didn't think taking care meant. I thought of that more in terms of being a friend, not physically taking care, but being there. And I think hopefully one can do that no matter what your station, wherever you might be in your life or whatever your circumstances might be.
I just feel like, how could she do that?
Yeah, I think that masked the objective reality of the time, and I just feel that there is an objective reality to the time. Yes, friendship is great. It's like, oh, hold your hand, sing Kumbaya-ish.
But it may be all you have.
And this is what I'm saying, that black women were taking care of each other and black men during the civil rights era. They were. It's just, I mean, they led, they were behind the scenes pushing a whole movement forward. Let's not discount that.
But I think that is what I was saying when it masks, it tries to create this individuality, this individualistic sense of like friendship, of these larger things that are in the background. Like, for example, in terms of the civil rights movement, this is a huge movement going on. We didn't see that. We just saw it as an individual friends, this and that.
Oh, I agree.
And there's a huge movement. So you have, people making bail for you if you.
But was that really? I think, from what you said, Shannon, this is just a fictional representation in it, and that's all it was. I mean, right? I mean, was it? I mean, I think people are wrong for taking it for being more than that.
I think they squeezed, bits and pieces of the civil rights movement in there. It's clearly, 1963, Medgar Evers is assassinated. They're talking about the March on Washington. We see him on TV. They mention the White Citizens
Council. So what
Council.
was their point in doing that, I guess? Why was that? How did that, Kennedy, how did that impact what the message they were trying to?
I mean, I paid really close attention to how much that was mentioned, and I felt like it wasn't that much. There was a point where Aibileen says to Minnie, she's like, what we're doing is not civil rights, we're doing something else. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an interesting point. And side note, I did notice the absence of African American men throughout the film. So I just thought little pepperings of the civil rights movement here and there, but I thought it was about Skeeter and watching Skeeter grow up.
Professor Ellen, you had your hand up for a while.
No, I just wanted to make one point kind of in defense of the movie. I know it has lots of problems, but I have to say that the performances of the black actors in particular, I think were just remarkable, and I think the woman who, Minnie, who won, I forget her real name.
Octavia
Spencer. She won the Academy Award. I thought she absolutely deserved it. I was glad to see the film. Did pay attention to the black actors. I mean, the Academy Award paid attention to the black actors. So, not that redeems it.
Right.
Because that's one redeeming second. Anyway, the other point I wanted to make is that there's a movie out that was made in the 90s, starring Whoopi Goldberg as the black contestant and Sissy Spacek, ironically enough, as the white woman. And it's called The Long Walk Home.
Yeah.
And it's done, I think, a much better job of covering this period of time, of including all perspectives in the story, and also the civil rights movement. You get a much better feeling for what was actually going on in the civil rights movement.
Right.
I recommend that you streaming on Netflix, so you can
But
watch it there.
But that film, they're dealing specifically with the Montgomery bus boycott. And so this is like, oh, we're writing a book, What the hell?
Two more comments?
Shannon, I was just wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit about how this relates to your research on sort of the representations of the civil rights movement films, because it struck me as sort of weird almost that it's like a feel-good comedy about the civil rights era, which is, you know, problematic and strange. How does this, you know, how does this film to you talk about Hollywood and its relationship with race at this point in time that they can release this movie that's basically a comedy about the civil rights movement, or a very comedic film about it? And how does that work with your...
I can't answer the second question, but the first question, in terms of the documentary films about the civil rights movement, during the civil rights movement, they're extremely problematic. And then I also talk about, in my dissertation, about the Eyes on the Prize series, and how there's this mentioning of white women attempting to get their black maids to work. And I think some scholar talked about the help and this idea that whites were involved in the civil rights movement, but they were the help. And so that was her problem with it. And I think that Eyes on the Prize as a documentary depicts that kind of struggle as whites in the actual background. And then also in terms of the work I'm doing now, I teach civil rights documentary at another school. And it's interesting, I mentioned Mississippi Burning before, and somebody else mentioned The Long Walk Home. But my students, I end the class with this docudrama, because you know that that's just a loose, very loose term. So I show all these documentaries about the civil rights movement throughout the quarter, and then I end with Mississippi Burning. And I had one student suggest you should start with Mississippi Burning, because that film really got me into the class. And then I looked up all this stuff, and then I realized that the film was just a lie in this Hollywood creation. So it got them very interested and invested in the civil rights movement. But at the same time, I was like, why do I have to start with Mississippi Burning when I want to show you these documentaries, which are representations too, you know? Yeah. But still, I had to, like, hook, in her opinion, hook them in with this docudrama. And I think that that's what The Help does in a way, you know. And I mentioned Mean Girls. There's something very satisfying about eating, you know, seeing her eat the shit pie. There's something satisfying about that. And we've seen that in films over and over again. This person gets their just desserts.